Have you ever wanted to see the images that you're able to get from a studio? This is something I've been curious about. I do constant lighting quite a bit, obviously, with the YouTube thing and us building out our own studio, but I've never been to like a professional level studio. So that's what we're going to do today. We got a super cool opportunity. My buddy Caleb is a Point Park University film/photography student. So we're going to go ahead and meet him up there. It's about an hour and a half drive. And we're going to spend a few hours in the studio just exploring light, the different props, and all that stuff. So come along with me. We're going to go ahead, get in the car, and make our drive up into the beautiful city of Pittsburgh. All right, y'all, so we have made it into the studio. We are at Point Park University with my man Caleb here. Caleb is getting some of the lights set up, and I have a little newer panel just for constant lighting for these little video clips that you're gonna get. But we're gonna try some like Rembrandt lighting, some split lighting, and we're gonna get some portraits, hopefully some headshots, like professional looking stuff for the business page, and just kind of experiment and have fun. So we have some of the lights set up. Up here we have a ProFoto with just a grid on it. And then on this back side, lighting up our background, we have another ProFoto with a snoot. So that's gonna light up that background area. And then right here, we have a negative fill. So we're gonna start off with just like basic Rembrandt lighting. I think we are gonna throw some gels over that snoot and maybe give the background a little bit of color. But we're gonna experiment and try some new things and see what happens.
That room that we were in.
Lights are all set up. We've done a few test shots, but we're taking a quick walk. We're gonna grab a pizza, grab some other little things, like a USB-C, some modifiers and stuff.
And RGB. Well, no.
Get everything set up. When we get back, some like gels, all that fun stuff. Have a little snack, and then hop back to it, and hopefully get some like good crispy images. Good morning. We're back to the studio. The pizza has been acquired. Caleb is already digging in, and after we scarf this down, we're gonna go ahead and get back to shooting. All right, so we have the R5 set up. And we are getting everything together to start shooting. It is tethered to Caleb over here's Capture One. When we plugged it in, it registered automatically, picked up the camera, which is super cool. Just a real quick, like kind of go over the lighting again. So constant light here, and this is more so just for the video side of things. That's just a newer 60 panel. And then right above me here, we have a beauty dish with a 60-degree grid on it. And then behind me, we have negative fill. Posing for the camera. Gray background. And then over on this side, we have a snoot. This is all on, like we stated earlier, ProFoto stuff. So pretty good stuff. Super powerful lights. Way more powerful than I expected coming into a studio setting, but I'm used to working with video and like consistent lighting, so this is a whole new experience for me. Looking with, you're getting this live, so you're getting a wide-angle perspective here of pretty much everything that's going on. We are on an 85 millimeter. It's the Viltrox, which is holding up very well. Pretty impressed with it, actually. The color rendition on it's been great. The sharpness, the detail. We are shooting at f8, so that's a pretty big factor rather than it being wide open. But it's consistently a good lens, especially when you consider the price that it comes in at.
Well.
Ooh. Brought out a little surprise here. Dear Fujifilm lovers, we're swapping out the Canon for... I don't know if you can see what that is there. That is a GFX. All right, so studio session is done. The GFX was sick, but I'm getting a little tired, so rather than reviewing those, I'm gonna have Caleb send them to me, and I'll pop those up on the screen. But we learned a lot tonight, I think. It's not something I would want to do every night for sure. It is very extensive. A lot of thought goes into it, a lot of minute adjustments, a lot of setup, and teardown is a little bit easier, but not any more fun than setup is. But I will say the images that you get are like, there's nothing that touches the sharpness, the contrast. Natural light shooting is a whole different beast when it comes to this, because you are adjusting where someone's standing, where what your settings are and all that stuff. Whereas what I'm picking up from this studio session is, that you want to shoot at your camera or your lens's sharpest range. So like on the Viltrox, that was like f5.6 to f8, somewhere in that range. We were shooting at f8. ISO, obviously, you're going to keep as low as possible to keep minimal noise, blah, blah, blah.
The higher the f-stop, I mean, we didn't do it as much, but the higher the f-stop, the more you can play with.
Yeah. And then the shutter speed on top of that, shutter speed is not as big of a factor in a lighting setup like this, because you could shoot it like 1/100, 1/125.
But you can't go past 50.
And have your subject mostly static. A lot of times, like when I'm doing outdoor family sessions or obviously with weddings, you have a lot of high movement. You don't want to be anywhere under like 1/250. These are a lot more controlled and a lot more dynamic lighting. And I understand why these lights are so high powered now. I do think it's like a case by case basis. Like, I wouldn't want to shoot strictly studio. I think I would not have a good time all the time. But it is cool seeing how much detail you could pull out of these cameras, how much contrast these lenses, and the sharpness, and then also just what you're able to do with crafting an image just by adjusting the light, where the light's hitting, how the light's hitting, how soft or how hard it is, and what areas of your subject that light is focusing on. So takeaway is, I had a good time. I learned a lot. We had pizza. We had good pizza. I don't think I would want to live the studio photographer life, especially not with flash. Flash adds a whole another thing on top of the constant light. So let me know what you think. If you are a studio photographer, tell me why. So some driving thoughts and takeaways from today's studio experience. I liked it. It was fun. It's a lot of setup for not so many photo results. And I guess that I'm kind of spoiled as a natural light shooter most of the time, or even on camera or off camera flash. It's a lot easier to just essentially run and gun and get the photos that you want. Whereas with the studio, to get a specific desired look, you are setting up 1 or 2 or 4 or however many lights you need to get the desired look, and then potentially only getting 1 or 2 shots out of that. Granted, the images that you're getting are super high quality. They're very sharp. There's a lot of contrast, and I think the ones that we did had some, I'll call it drama to them. something that you're not going to get with natural light. And it definitely like adds a professional factor, I want to say, is what I'm going to call it. It feels entirely different being in there and shooting in a studio setting where you have control over everything. I like the control. I don't love that I only walked away with like 10 photos essentially tonight. Now, I will say this, like, obviously I'm not an experienced studio photographer. There's a lot of things that I had to figure out, especially because everything was like wired and tethered, and those are factors that like I didn't necessarily like have going in. So just something to consider. I think if everything was done like wireless or like via Bluetooth or the electronic hot shoe on the R5, that could have made things slightly more simple and quicker. I do understand lighting to, an intermediate degree. I'm not a cinematographer by any means, and I'm not like a professional studio photographer, obviously, or I wouldn't be making this video. But what I will say is I'm not like a beginner when it comes to lighting, and even going into it with like some knowledge and having done like studio sessions and school photos, for example, there was a lot more small and minute adjustments that like I've never factored in, that I understand why studio photographers are as like sought after and able to charge the way that they are, because it's a lot of work. My feet hurt, my back hurts, and granted, like I said, like the images that I'm going to show you are phenomenal. Like, you're not going to get that anywhere else other than in a studio setting. But was it worth the work? I'm not sure. And maybe something I might want to do once a month or once every couple months. But to do it every night, I would lose my absolute mind. Just my thoughts. All right, so obviously we are at the studio now, and we're going to go ahead and do some work on these portraits. We got them loaded off the CF Express card, and we are in Lightroom currently. I got a screen recording going, but I'm going to kind of like just briefly explain what I'm doing with each photo. So currently, the first photo that I'm working on is, I think we're going to do in color, just because it shows my birthmark, and that's something that I wanted to portray. So we're going to apply one of my presets that I've created. This one's called a cucumber because it has a little bit of a green hue to it. And that's the base that we're going to work off of. So go ahead and close the preset pane. And let's see if we can properly get this exposure adjusted. Add some contrast to it. And pull these highlights down just slightly. There's a little bit of a hot spot on my head because I was slightly oily. I'm definitely going to drop those shadows and give it more of a dramatic look. Pull those whites down and the blacks, and then we're going to hit our S-curve. Now, S-curves, I typically have a pretty formulaic way that I do these, and I don't know if you know how the S-curves work on Lightroom, but essentially the further left you are, the further into the blacks. As you move towards middle left, that is going to be your shadows. Directly in the middle is going to be your midtones. The fourth grid, or third grid line rather, is going to be your highlights. So you can see as you push those up, you get more hot spots. And then the final side is going to be your whites. So typically what I like to do with my S-curves is drop my whites off a little bit, push my highlights slightly, and I don't know if that's going to work on this photo, so let's play with it a little bit. And we're actually going to pull those down some more. And then I go down to my shadows and push my shadows down,
And then if you bring your blacks up slightly, not to the point that they're fully crushed, but just edge them up a little bit off of that corner there, that is going to give slightly more of a filmic look. So your blacks won't be quite as deep, but it gives them like kind of a nice roll off. We're going to push the warmth up just a touch. And I don't want to go too much with that because my plan is to add a little bit of warmth into my hair and into my beard to kind of show that I am slightly ginger. Pulling the vibrance down off of this just because it is a little bit oversaturated for my taste. And then those oranges we're going to pull down to a +5 and push a little bit of luminance into them. And if you look here what that does, that's going to light that beard up a little bit more. Color grades, I'm pretty happy with where this is at. I am going to actually bring this warmth up just a touch more because I'm looking a little pale. So I think right about there looks good. And then we are going to pull these highlights down just a little bit more. I think we're in a good spot right about there. That looks pretty good to me. Now, before we get too far, I do use a lot of masking. So masking is going to allow me to kind of pinpoint some of these certain locations, add contrast in specific spots that I want it, add a little bit of saturation into places like the eyes, the hair. I will probably push the shadows a little bit more on the outfit that I was wearing just because I don't want the outfit to be distracting, and there is a little bit of like graininess in that outfit, so just from my visual perspective when I look at it, that's the first thing I see is my shirt. So push the clarity down slightly, and I do this with most photos is push the clarity. I don't like a overly like clinically sharp photo. The dehaze on here is in the +25 just on this preset, and I think that's part of the reason why we're getting some of these hot spots. So we're going to actually push that down slightly, and as you push that down, you'll notice it's going to brighten your image just a little bit. So we are going to take this exposure back down a few ticks. And then vignette, I think we're in a good spot with. Bring it back up a little bit just because I do like the lighter side on the left portion of the picture. And then another cool thing that you can do in Lightroom, I'm on a Mac just as a heads up, with the sharpening box, if you hit Option and then start to drag, you can see in a little bit better detail what each thing does. So radius is going to give you the radius in which like the sharpening happens. The sharpening tab is just going to show you kind of the black and white, but how much each portion is sticking out. And I usually keep this, somewhere between, we'll say 60 and 80. I think after you push too far with that, especially on a camera like the R5, you start becoming like too sharp. So we're going to go at 73 on this. 73 feels like a good number. Also, if you haven't noticed, pretty much all of my sliders go to a odd number, and it's because I am weird. No other explanation other than that. I do it on the microwave. I do it on my volume knobs. So just a little fun fact about me here. So in the detail tab, you're going to see that kind of brought up the hair a little bit. And then masking, if you push all the way down, it's going to essentially sharpen everything. So you do want to slide that masking. And what I'm trying to accomplish here is the outlines and like hard cuts from like my beard to my hair to my ears, my nose, but I don't want to sharpen any like skin imperfections or wrinkles, things like that. So 85 seems like a good spot. We might push it up a little bit more, maybe to 87. We're going to go 87. I'm not a huge proprietor of noise reduction. I do like a lot of the built-in noise on most photos. So unless it's like super grainy, I usually leave the noise reduction alone. Color noise reduction, I keep it 25. On the R5 or on the R7 rather, we do work that a little bit differently because it does induce noise fairly earlier. But the R6, the R5, it's very rare that I actually have to do any kind of noise reduction. So next thing we're going to do is I'm going to remove this little scar that I have on my nose because it is one of the things that about my face that I'm not a huge fan of. And then that slight pimple there. I have a few little straggler hairs that I'm going to take care of. And I think that pretty much puts us in a good spot. I don't like to do too much as far as like removing features from people's face, that kind of stuff. I think for the most part I like the natural look, but there are little things that you can take care of, and like you can see my skin's a little bit porous on this one, so we are going to soften that through clarity, but that's going to be in the masking tab. So I think we pretty much got the look that we want here. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go mask off some areas. So another cool thing with Lightroom, since they've updated with all the AI features and all that stuff, you can selectively edit and mask different portions of a photo down to each person. Now we only have one person in this, so you're going to see as I select person 1, it's going to select me. And then you can go through and select all the different portions of that person. So for this one, for example, we're going to select facial skin, create the mask, pull those highlights back down a little bit more, like just a touch. We'll go -3 on this. Pull those shadows, just, crush them all the way. It doesn't seem to be affecting too much, and I like that added contrast. We'll go 31 just for sake of not absolutely crushing them. And then what I'm going to do is push my clarity down, and typically for like facial skin and stuff like that, I go between like a 17 and sometimes like a 35. It just depends on how rugged I'm looking. So we're going to hit 31 on this. And I'm also going to push my texture down just slightly to like 11. And then bring that dehaze up. Let's just bring it up a click. Let's go to +3. So I think that got kind of my skin where I want it to be. We still do have a little bit of that hot spot there, but I'm not super concerned with it. I am going to paint these two areas in. As you can see, I have a slight hot spot on my nose here. So we're going to just brush that. And then this hot spot up here, we're going to brush in. And rather than drop, we'll brush right here too around this eye. I had eaten pizza this night, so it was slightly greasy. Rather than pushing the highlights down and stuff like that, we're going to do a clarity adjustment and see how that affects it. Because a lot of times you can get where you need to be just by adjusting the clarity. Sliding clarity either way is going to have some effects on your exposure in those areas. And I also like the way that when you adjust clarity, it kind of gives like a slight roll off to that instead of it just being like a hard cut. You can do that with feathering as well. Clarity is just a lot simpler. The brush that I'm using does have some feathering built into it as well, so that also helps. I'm also going to go and remove this tiny little hair sticking off of my nose. There we go. So this is where we're at with the skin. So you can still see that I have some texture in there. I have, some of my imperfections, but it did just soften it a little bit. What I found with the studio lighting is while it did make everything nice and sharp and contrasting, it seemed to show more of my imperfections, and I'm feeling a little self-conscious about it, to be honest. We're going to take this to a 4x5 just because these are pretty much just going to be for social media posts. And then we're going to work on the hair. So back in, going to go to people. It's going to detect me. And click person 1, create. And we are going to select hair. So with this, I'm going to bring the exposure up on this a little bit just so it contrasts from that background. And then push the highlights down just slightly and push the shadows up just a hair. So that kind of gave more of an outline up around my, like the crown of my head. And I think it just brought it out from that background a little bit more, which I like. Let's see what adding some contrast does. I like that, right at about 9. And then you'll see, like, bringing the shadows up versus bringing the blacks is going to be an entirely different look. So, actually, I'm going to push these blacks down just slightly. Add a little bit more contrast in there. So we're going to get a 19 on the contrast and -5 on the blacks. And white shouldn't have too much. Whites did a little bit, so we'll go +31 on the whites. So it brought out that, brighter area right around the front of the head. And then this is where I'll start like adjusting clarity. Hair areas, I like to push the clarity up, and this is one of the very few places in an image that I will push clarity up. I also do this in my landscape photos. So we're going to push that clarity up just a little bit. We'll go to 11 on the clarity, and then push the texture down just a touch. And you can see that brought out the hair real nice. I think it framed in my head nicely, brought out some detail, but didn't do too much to take away from like the entirety of the picture. And then let's see what some dehaze does. We'll add some dehaze in there because I do plan on, I'm actually going to bring this clarity back down. I like that. I like it with the negative clarity. I'm going to eat my words on this. So we're going to go -9 on the clarity, -5 on the texture, and -13 on the dehaze. Then I'm going to push in a little bit of warmth, just because I am slightly ginger, and I like to embrace that. So not overly done, just a touch, like +3 I think is a good spot. And bring this tint up on the magenta to a +5. I think we're kind of in a good spot there, where it's showing the color, not oversaturated. Next thing we are going to work on is the beard. And I don't have any particular way that I like to work on these things. I just kind of grab whatever feels good in that moment. So facial hair we're not going to do too much with. We are going to add some contrast to it. Drop the highlights just slightly. So we'll go like -5 on these highlights. Pull the shadows up just a little bit. So we'll go like +17 on these shadows. And you can see my beard's red. It is what it is. I don't really need to do any kind of adjustments with that. And we'll work on that clarity now. So we'll go down on the clarity a little bit. Let's go -23. And then up on the texture. So you can see that kind of added some texture to it, but it still kept it nice and soft. And then the dehaze, we'll go a -5. Just brighten it up just a touch, add some more softness to it. And I think we're in a good spot here. So now what I'm going to do is the eyes. And I like to have a little bit of that twinkle in the eye. So I do tend to bring my eyes up a little bit. And I'm probably going to get a little bit of hate for this because it's not what was actually on the picture, but dynamic range on these cameras is great, so I figure if you can make use of it, why not? So highlights, bringing them up, shadows. A lot of times you will want to use the shadows and push them up, but currently that's not what we need to do. And clarity I like to push up on the eyes just to show a little bit more of their detail and what they have to offer. So you can see when we brought that clarity up, it also darkened it a little bit, so we're now going to push those shadows a little bit more, push those highlights a little bit more, and then there. I think we're in a good spot with the eye. That's basically true to life. It's what it looks like sitting here looking at me. And finally, last thing that we're going to do here is go back to person, select close. I'm going to push the exposure down on those a little bit, add some contrast. Add a little bit to the highlights, push the shadows down slightly. And I think that adds some nice contrast in there. And then just to take away from that pattern that's my shirt's made out of, we're going to push the clarity and the texture down a little bit. And I think we're in a pretty good spot right there. So it's going to finish out that picture. I'm going to give the camera a break because it's getting a little bit hot. And then we will go to one more and do the black and white. All right, so we are back. I'm going to do one more of these photos. I know this video is probably getting to be longer than I expected, but I want to show you guys just a quick black and white edit. So we're going to start with this photo here. We are going to go into Adobe Monochrome, and I don't have any like personal black and whites that I edit off of. So usually what I do is pull from one of the the Adobe premiums. For this set, I've been liking the look of either the PB06, which is the black and white portraits, or the PB07. So I think I'm liking the contrast and the edginess of PB06, so we're going to start with that. You can slide these sliders here. I find that a lot of times they become like too harsh, but we are going to go to like 117 on this one. So what we'll do from here is push the contrast a little bit more, and then bring these blacks up just a touch, just for that slight fadey look. And for the most part, I'm going to leave these exposure and light adjustments how they are. I am going to push the highlights down just slightly. We'll go to like -9, just so it's not like that harsh lighting. Shadows, you can see that as we do shadows, there's not too much happening, so we'll go like a +7 on these, just to bring out that little bit extra hairline. Whites, I don't like having the whites pushed up too much, so we're going to just go +5 on those, and then the blacks, we're going to go -11. I think that we've got like a good look there. I'm going to do my 4x5 crop right now, just so I can see what I'm working with, and bring that just slightly above the hairline. Get rid of my love handles down there. And let's bring these oranges up just slightly. So this is the black and white mixer, and this is essentially going to adjust like your luminance in those areas. We're going to bring the purples up slightly too, just because I think we have a little bit of purple hue to that light there. I like the way, and it's barely even noticeable, but there's like a slight magenta tint to the photo, and I'm going to leave that because I do like that slight coloration, barely noticeable, but definitely still there. We are going to adjust the balance slightly to kind of help lean into that a little bit more. I got to adjust that magenta one click because if it's an even number, it's going to drive me nuts. All right, there we go. So most of the black and white work is going to be like kind of contrast work, and then I'm going to do some softening in here. So as you can see, I got a little bit of pores going there, some leftover hairs. So what I'm going to do is, this is a great tool to use for landscapes as well. I don't want to select the entirety of the face. I kind of want to leave this little bit of rim lighting here and the shadows and all that stuff alone. So what I'm going to do is the range, and then I'm going to select the luminance range. And for this, I want to be backed out all the way, by the way. So back in here, delete that. And then we are going to do range, luminance range, and then select this little area on my cheek here. So these sliders up here are going to be essentially what it's selecting, and then your left slider, this guy right here, is going to be the feathering of it. So we're going to push that to where it's mostly just on those hot spot areas, and push the contrast down just a touch. That's going to help with any of like the dark spots that I have. Push the texture down. We're going to go a good bit on this just because you can see every imperfection there. So negative 27 I think is a good spot. And then we'll go negative 59 on the clarity. And I'm going to push 1 into dehaze, and then we'll go 3 on the grain. And usually I'm like not huge on adding grain unless I'm like really going for a film look. But it can help with like transitionary points, like between like a highlight area and a shadow area. It can also help with different colored areas. Like if you go from one color extreme to another one, adding a little bit of grain can help with that. So honestly, I'm pretty happy with this. I'm going to do a few little things here. So I'm going to add a linear gradient, slide that right there. And the reason I'm dragging this up so high is to get more of that gradient area. We'll drop that to like right down by my elbow, and then push those shadows down, push the exposure down a little bit. You can see that just added a little oomph at the bottom of the photo. We'll go into the beard and touch that up just slightly, so facial hair. And I'm not going to do like a whole lot of adjustment with that, just slightly bring up the exposure, slightly bring up the shadows, and then add some clarity. And you can see that made it just pop out a little bit more. Drop that dehaze just 1 point, push the texture up just a little bit, and I think that added like a little bit of drama to that area. And then finally, we're just going to touch up that hair. We don't have to worry about the iris, the pupil, or anything like that on this one because I have my eyes closed for the most part. So with the hair, I'm not really going to do too much. I kind of like where the exposure's at, so we're just going to add some texture to it. We'll go plus 33 on the texture and go plus 5 on the dehaze. And then maybe just bring the shadows up just slightly. And I think that put us in a good spot there. I will say this. I have an easier time, and I only was quick at this because I did one of these already. I have an easier time editing color photos than I do black and white. I find that when I do black and whites, I pay a lot more attention to minute details. Whereas with color, not that I don't, but color I kind of play a little bit more. Black and white really makes me focus on just the image itself and little things like the beard, the imperfections in the skin, like specific areas where there's shadows. So I go into black and whites knowing that it might be a little bit more work, but the thing I love about black and white photos is it creates like A, sometimes a sense of nostalgia, and B, a sense of like drama. I feel like this is an image that has some power to it, rather than a straight color photo where you kind of look at the image and just see the image. The black and whites can kind of pull more emotion out of you. But before I get yammering and make an hour-long video, I'm going to close this out. Thanks for tagging along on my photo studio and editing adventure, and hopefully I will see you guys on the next one. I've got some big plans here for the YouTube channel this year. My goal is to put out 52 videos, so essentially on average one a week, but that's not always going to happen. But I've got days scheduled once a week to record, so Wednesdays is going to be my day to record and hopefully edit, and I'd like to just kind of focus on growing this channel a little bit more. So if you're wanting to be part of that, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and come back. We appreciate it. Just quick overview of like everything that we shot with. We were using ProFoto lights. I was on my Canon R5 and the Viltrox 1.8 85mm, and I'm editing in Lightroom. So if you had any questions, there's your answers. We'll see y'all on the next one.
Yo, get the speaker box loud, hitting that stuff till you hearing that sound.